Good morning, everybody. Get started in a few minutes.
Hey, everyone.
All right, we'll get started at 4 minutes after. All right, let's get started. So we'll start today with the usual SIG check-in, and then we'll move on to the agenda topics. I think we have a fairly big agenda today. All right, starting with specification, looks like 1.7 was released last week. I think we talked about that, what that was going to include last week, so no other updates there. Metrics, we're making progress towards the API spec SDK feature freeze. Originally targeting September 30th to be the feature freeze date, but now we're expecting a few weeks delay. I don't know if Carlos or Riley or anyone, you want to add anything here, or should we keep going?
We can move on.
Okay, perfect. No updates for logs, no updates for PHP, no significant updates for Java. Any updates for Java instrumentation? Okay, we'll keep going. JavaScript 1.0 for Trace SDK was released last week. Congratulations. Metrics work is gaining some steam, and the OTLP exporter depended on an experimental metrics package. Work is ongoing to split the trace part out. Understood. I noticed that. I was curious about it. Cool. Python started work on the error handling compliance, and they've continued to work on the metrics implementation. .NET actively working on implementing metric views to be released as part of beta 1 this week. That's pretty exciting. Delayed from last week. That's okay. Adding experimental support for the OTLP block exporter. Go 1.0.1 was released on Friday with a contrib release to follow today. We'll release more 1.0.0 detectors and propagators. Metrics work is moving to the foreground, and some user concern regarding the strictness of processing OTel resource attributes may result in spec issue if Go is not an outlier. Go folks, do you want to expand on this today, right now?
Sure. It's, basically, the users are trying to construct that environment variable in places where they don't have access to a scripting language and just smashing them together, which ends with 2 commas together. And currently, we reject the value if there are any empty values in the set once we split it on commas. So they're going to look at other languages, see what they're doing. And if other languages are also doing the same, they may want to create a spec issue to allow for more lenience in having empty values there.
Got it. Okay. C++ working on metrics implementation. New contributors are also welcome. Planning for the 1.1.0 beta 1 for tracing. So we'll have spec changes between 1.0.0 and v1.7.0. OTel CPP contrib, Fluent D exporter for logs and tracing is under review. Cool. Event tracing for Windows exporter for logs is also under review. Yeah, neat. I remember working on this as an intern. Ruby, interested in how the release announcement should be done and if it can be done with any other GA releases. Let's talk about that now. Do we have any of the Ruby folks on the call?
Not exactly, but I volunteered at the last SIG meeting to bring this up.
Cool. Yeah, so you're certainly welcome to write a blog post on the OpenTelemetry Medium post or Medium blog. The way that works is you write a draft, you submit the draft to the blog, and then anyone who has access, myself and Ted and I think a few others, who has admin access to the blog can approve it for final publishing. It'll show up under your name on the blog. It's a good question about if there's any other recent GA releases that we want to include in this. I think we already did one around the collector and metrics. Adelita authored that. Have we had one around? I think we had one also like catching up on a few of the SDKs like Go, but I don't know if we've had any that mentioned JavaScript. So perhaps we could do Ruby and JavaScript together. Okay, seems reasonable to me. I mean, so definitely chat with like Daniel or some of the folks on the JavaScript SIG, and I think the timing works out well.
Cool.
All right, no updates for Swift or the collector. And then Erlang, in need of someone on the TC to review sign off on GA. So do we have Carlos or someone else on the TC who wants to take point?
Erlang, I know nothing about Erlang.
Does anyone on the TC know Erlang well? Maybe a challenge. I know most of the members. I don't think any of them are Erlang experts.
Yeah, me neither, but we should certainly bring it up tomorrow. Wednesday.
Okay.
Maybe we can find someone.
All right. So,
to be fair, is anybody an Erlang expert?
Tristan is.
Yeah, I would have thought of Tristan as well.
You, my own.
Armin, do you want to take point just bringing this up with the TC and starting the process?
Yeah, sure, I will.
Thanks, Armin.
Maybe just pairing with an Erlang maintainer or someone to like walk through it.
Yeah, can pair with Tristan. All right, and same question for the Ruby SIG about announcements. Yeah, so you should pair up Erlang, Ruby, and JavaScript, I think.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, first major topic, Tigran, default OTLP protocol again. Apparently choosing gRPC as the default protocol is painful for Ruby. There's also evidence that gRPC is less performant and has strictly more requirements for underlying network infrastructure than HTTP. Given all this, I believe we should recommend OTLP HTTP as the default, but allow languages to choose their own. All right.
Yeah, that's the summary of it. This was discussed in the past, I guess. We decided that gRPC is the right default, but I think we have new evidence here, which probably means that we can't say that HTTP is the only default for all languages, because some released SDKs which are declared stable already use gRPC as the default, and that would be a breaking change. That leaves us with the option of saying that the languages can make their own choice here for the default, and probably recommend HTTP as the default, which then allows Ruby to go with HTTP, right? I think that's the only sane thing I can think of. I don't know what others think.
Speaking from a company that has a PHP shop that has been adopting Go, gRPC is unbelievably language differentiating. PHP has a very difficult gRPC implementation. I guess the right way to say it is any language that Google uses has a great gRPC implementation because they have a vested interest in that, and I'm sure that there are other companies that have the same thing.
Fancy that.
What's that?
Said fancy that.
Yeah, fancy that. But I guess my point that I'd like to make is I want to echo those exact same sentiments, both as a maintainer and as a company that will be using all these libraries. HTTP, as much as we don't like HTTP, it's a universal default for so many things. And gRPC does have implementation, not problems, but hurdles that might make it more difficult for some languages to adopt it as its default and for wider spread adoption. So +1 on HTTP as default, but letting languages choose if gRPC needs to be right.
Yeah.
I would also recommend, even for languages that have gRPC as their default, to make sure they also include an HTTP implementation, and vice versa, just to allow users a way to get around dependency conflicts. We see this more consistently with gRPC, where the version we want to use, regardless of what version that is, creates a dependency conflict with something else the end user is using. So making sure there's an alternate implementation available just so they can get around this dependency conflicts is really important.
Agreed. Also, if languages were just going to support one, we could end up in a world where half our languages only support gRPC and half of them only do HTTP for OTLP, and that would be bad.
Yeah.
You'd have components that, you'd have the collector being the only thing that could really bridge that gap, and I don't think that's ideal. Okay.
Morgan, that's not 100% true. There are HTTP to gRPC implementations all over the web, Twerp being one of the biggest ones, but again, that's just like a huge barrier to entry that a lot of companies
it's a real pain. Yeah. So I agree. They should support both, even if one ends up being a lot better than the other. Which I think, Tigran, is basically what you're saying. Like a few weeks ago on this call, we said gRPC should be the default in almost all cases unless it's untenable. And I think what you're saying is we should reduce that to just say any open telemetry component that uses OTLP should support both HTTP and gRPC. But we as maintainers, and we'll have to run this to the spec group, but as maintainers, we're saying we don't have a preference between those two. You should support both, but either one could be the default. That's okay. Okay.
I guess I want to know if there is any objections against, making the default one a choice of language maintainers. Does anybody think that it shouldn't be so? Like it should be mandated top down, that everybody should be using one default and for all?
I'm not hearing any disagreement.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, if there's anyone who you think may be objecting to that, please direct them to the issue. And if I don't hear from anybody, I will just submit a PR, which makes that the default, right? Allows the default to be a choice. Okay. That's
all right. Perfect. I'll put that in bold. While I do that, Carlos, do you want to start up the next topic? All right, we may not have Carlos here, so let me just put this in bold. There we go. All right, so this one's from Carlos. Default value for the exporter URL. So for example, HTTP versus HTTPS.
Yeah, that's correct. That's what
right
I ended up. Sorry, it was a problem in my connection. Yeah, I think this is kind of straightforward. He mentioned that changing the actual value now from what we have could probably be creating a lot of pain, but at least we should create. We would have a suggestion there as a good starting point. And I would like to know about maintainers. Please take a look at that. What he proposes, it's relatively simple, not very polemical, I think. So if you have any opinion, let us know. But I think what he suggests is the way to go. Just a suggestion to try to go for one.
All right. Any feedback from anyone? All right, I'll just note that here. No objections on the call, but please respond to the issue if you have an opinion of this. Okay, I think this was already answered, but OTLP in JavaScript SDK appears to be experimental. I think Dan or Armin just already mentioned that this is because it was one package included metrics and tracing, and you're trying to split that apart.
And yeah, and sorry for being late as well for this point, but yeah, I think that this is something that was on the works for a long time, and I talked to Tigran like 2 or 3 times about what needs to happen next. So I will be working on this for the next weeks to make it stable. So
okay.
Yeah, just for your information, we have a developer working on just as a prototype, just a matter of validation, Java JSON exporter. It may not reach stability, but it needs to be prototype at least to know that it works and try to detect anything that is weird.
So there is also OTLP JSON implementation in the collector, if you want to have a look as a reference, a receiver and an exporter. So it is implemented in the collector. It's just not declared stable, but it does work.
So that's fantastic, because that means, okay, so because I remember that we wanted to have a pair of implementations, not like besides JavaScript. So we will have JavaScript, the collector, and the Java one should be enough to validate this.
Yeah.
Carlos,
we have both receiver and exporter in the collector.
Carlos, are you specifically talking about JSON?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Next up is Ouch. Ouch is doing some research about how we can make OpenTelemetry even easier to adopt, and I think he wanted to bring that up here. So, Ouch, if you're here.
Yeah, absolutely awesome. Hey everyone. So, yeah, I think we've made some great progress over the past couple of weeks, just looking at the progress we're making on the language instrumentation agents as well as the collector achieving the tracing stability milestone. So, but I did want to also take this opportunity to step back, and if we can all really reflect upon how can we really improve the getting started experience. I think if we have any kind of inputs and feedback about what are the concerns being voiced by the community on CNCS Slack or other channels of communication, right? I wanted to actually just reach out on this call, as well as maybe get some opinion from all of you about, is there a better way to collect this kind of a feedback from maybe different SIGs or any other channels of communication? I thought this would be a great chance to discuss this more.
I have some really good feedback on this based on some things that have happened in my SIG. There actually I have 2 pieces of feedback. We have there's an OpenTelemetry user research feedback form that we have. If you're interested in getting it, that might be helpful. It's really cool because it gives you the ability to have the end user look at the implementation of your language and then follow through with where their missteps, like not missteps, but like where their disconnects are. And that might be really nice to get for your language SIG if you're just worried about your particular language. And that being said, with like a larger viewpoint, I think that there might be like a slight disconnect between potential end users of OpenTelemetry and this group of people. We all have such a very strong vested interest in in knowing how the specification works and how it works for our respective languages, blah blah blah. And I think that it may be prudent at some point in the future to have like an OpenTelemetry in plain English document that lives somewhere, so that an end user that's really interested in starting to use OpenTelemetry can say like, oh, this is a span, this is a link, this is a XYZ. I think that it would be really nice if we just had like a plain English dictionary somewhere, so that end users could really understand how to use OpenTelemetry a little bit better. I think that communication might be helpful for everybody, but especially for a group of people that want to start using our observability libraries, but can't have a little bit of a disconnect between what that looks like in theory and what it looks like in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think just starting from the basics, something that kind of explains to people about what each of them are, each of the components, and I think something more basic like you discussed. So I think that'll be great. And if you can share that user research form for sure, I think that'll be very helpful as well.
Sure. I have an example from when we did it in PHP. I'll share it in the Open Telemetry maintainer Slack room.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. Yeah.
Yeah, I can say one thing we notice consistently is just the more help we can give people on the installation phase, instructions for installing Open Telemetry. That's usually the place where people get hung up the most, being able to not just install the SDK, but also all of the instrumentation, and then checking that it's correct. I would love, I feel like we're stretched too thin to do it right now, but after metrics and like this instrumentation work is off our plate, I would love to start like a diagnostics SIG.
Yeah, because you talked about it in the past, I think, Ted, right?
Yeah, that is a thing that's still on my mind, but that's for it. So the getting started experience is kind of two parts. One, do I have enough instructions to like just get everything done normally and feel confident that I've installed all the pieces I need to install? And I think we could do that now. And then the other part is, if I feel like I've gone through all of those steps, but things still aren't working, what is the diagnostics routine that I run to track down where context might be broken? Am I exporting data correctly? Did it get to the collector correctly? And then from the collector onwards is where the problem is, stuff like that. So it would be great if people do have ideas on that front, definitely write them down somewhere, because I think it's something we should do at some point.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable. I do intend to, maybe I will tag in a particular document to this particular point. If anybody feels free, feel free to add in any more inputs. I think a couple of them have already come up right now, but as well as any other related to the diagnostic SIG or even general, I'll add that here as well. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Any other comments on making OpenTelemetry easier to adopt? All right, next up, Ted, how are SIGs handling bad API input?
Yeah, this came up from the Python SIG. I thought it would be worthwhile to raise it with the maintainers. There was just a question of, we have broad rules around saying that the API should not throw exceptions and muck up the user's code, which is very important. But we don't actually have a lot of details in the spec, both around, for example, what are the boundaries of saying we shouldn't throw exceptions? For example, if they call a method that doesn't exist, should that throw an exception the way it normally would in a language? Just to give an extreme case. And then the other thing we don't really have a lot of in the spec is what to actually do in the face of bad input. We generally say it should get, piped to some centralized, logging or exception reporting facility, but there aren't a lot of details specifically for objects, for method calls that return an object, what should be done. So for example, if someone tries to start a span and gives garbage input into the start span call, should we return a no-op span? Should we return a functional span with some kind of default values that say the span was created in error, et cetera, et cetera? So I just wanted to highlight that's a place where we don't actually have a lot of stuff in the spec, but probably different working groups are actually doing something here. And so it would just be helpful to know what everyone is currently doing in this regard.
Yeah,
but you just put try and then all the OpenTelemetry stuff and then catch and then nothing, right? Like
right.
But it's important, Ted, in these discussions also to distinguish between API behavior and SDK behavior, because I don't think in the spec it's necessarily clear that there might or might not be different behaviors between those two cases.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, totally. What what stuff should the API layer be handling, for example, and what stuff should the SDK layer be handling. There's also some like edge cases we discovered around, like, for example, providers, right? Like there's some small portion of the API package that doesn't call down to the SDK because it's its own self-contained mechanism for registering the SDK. And for the rest of the stuff, you can say, well, the SDK should catch what exceptions it's going to catch and pipe them to some facility. But for that chunk of the API where it doesn't call into the SDK, what should that thing do?
Yeah, I think the two big pieces right now are the context and propagation, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, but a question for John Watson. So you just said that there might be different behaviors between the API and the SDK. Do you refer to different behaviors when it comes to handle an error that has happened in the API or in the SDK?
No, I'm referring to, so if someone has written some instrumentation that's bad and doing things incorrectly in a way that is like illegal span names, like Ted's example. If you're using the API, we have a very, very strict requirement that we don't break a user's app because the instrumentation may be coming in from a library that the user is not in control of. But that may or may not be true if the user decides to actually install an SDK and use things. Should that bad input, how should that bad input behave in the face of an actual installed SDK? That could be different. Like we could decide that it's okay that it throws exceptions in that case, or we could decide that it's okay that it does log to something. So I think it's just important to keep those two cases in mind because the API is going to be embedded in libraries. And the user may not have any interest in actually using OpenTelemetry at all, but they may be using that library that has OpenTelemetry API usages inside it. And we cannot we cannot change the behavior of their app in the case of the bad instrumentation.
Right.
Okay, so if a user uses the SDK directly, it may be okay that an exception is raised. Is that?
I mean, it may be. I don't know. We need to decide. We need to specify.
We need to specify it and be consistent across all languages.
I think another way of phrasing it is the no-op SDK may swallow more errors than the production SDK. I think is what John's saying. Like there might actually be slightly different rules for, what, like the no-op SDK should swallow basically everything because, like John was saying, like you don't want instrumentation you have no control over blowing your stuff up when you're not using OpenTelemetry. But maybe there are some extreme cases. There are some cases where you would say, actually, no, we do want to throw this error because it's such an egregious misuse of the API that we should throw.
Yeah, I really like that on a bad input to starting a span, returning a no-op span. We had been just using on Atom, that means nothing happened, and then we have to accept that everywhere a span's accepted, which has been fine. But yeah, I didn't even think about the no-op thing, which makes me think there really should be some good more going through the spec again and picking out these points where something is returned and saying what do we do when the input is bad, and having that across all the implementations. But also like in the main spec, there's stuff about performance and error handling in general. I started on, and this might be good for each language, I started on in the Erlang repo a principles document that will have stuff like never crash, especially because it goes against much of the coding style for Erlang people, that we have to accept every input and do nothing if something comes in, when we're used to just crashing and no longer can crash, because the point is to never have this affect the user code. So a principles document might be useful for each repo. So users coming in to work, developers coming in to work on it, know where things in the project are coming from.
Yeah. Likewise, if we are going to do some kind of centralized reporting of these things, I don't think we have anything spec'd out about how that should work. And again, I think different groups have gone ahead and like done something reasonable there. So this is just an area where maybe the first step would just be to understand what everybody is currently doing in these situations, and maybe see if we could normalize some of that and write these guidelines down. Because this is an area where it's a little confusing, and I think our explanation is helpful for us to actually explain why we're doing it, because it is a little odd in some cases.
Okay. Ted, I think probably the best form for this going forward is going to be the spec sig, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I'll bring it up.
Okay.
Bring it up there
Cool.
again. But yeah, maybe start a doc for SIGs to just write down what their current behavior is.
Yep. All right, that's it for the agenda. Any other topics? Then I think we are done. Catch you folks later.